Doctor Who Season 1 is now over. We've had the final episode, the second part of this first finale for the 15th Doctor. In this final review of the season, let's digest Empire of Death. First things first, I did actually watch this story on the big screen for the first time. I went to one of the cinema screenings they were doing up and down the UK for the Season 1 finale, so they kind of repeated The Legend of Ruby Sunday at about 11 o'clock, and then Empire of Death followed at sort of 12 o'clock to tie in with the midnight release. There was also a little exclusive video clip from Millie Gibson halfway through between parts 1 and 2, so thanking us for following the series, following Ruby's journey. A great evening all round, great to be there watching it alongside my mates Pete, Joe and Dave. But as for the actual episode, what did I think? Well, yeah, okay, some slightly mixed feelings here. There was some stuff I really did like, and the kind of overall sentiments of it. There was some stuff as well which felt a bit random and like, oh, why are we doing this, or why are we not doing this? I think it felt like a very Russell finale. Like if last week was the part 1 part 1 to the part 1, this was like the most Russell T Davies finale ever. So let's get into the detail of some of this. So first of all, we kind of pick up after that cliffhanger with the Doctor and Mel in the theatre, and obviously with Unit back in the Unit sort of headquarters ops room. And I did really like that. I thought it was very solid, a thing with, Susan Triad and Harriet Harbinger doing the kind of whole, I bring Sutekh's dust of death and kind of blowing it around the rooms. Very, very ominous, very scary. I loved that. And I think actually it was great to see a bit more of those two overall as well. Like, Harriet didn't have any lines of dialogue, I think, beyond that. She just kind of stood around looking ominous. But it was nevertheless great to see more of them throughout the episode, particularly with Susan Triad, seeing more of her in that sort of horrific mask with the sunken eyes and the whole skeletal thing going on, seeing them both in their cloaks. That felt very nice as well as less of a visual thing, because, we've got Sutekh as this big CGI dog thing, for better or for worse, which I'll talk about in a moment. I think visually that was kind of a saving grace, because obviously we haven't got the return of the mummies here from Pyramids of Mars. The original Sutekh mask and outfit has been completely done away with, like I say, as well, in favour of this big CGI thing. And the whole sort of death mask skeletal thing felt like a kind of modern day take on the mummies, or modern day take on what Sutekh's sort of death foot soldiers would be like. So I very much enjoyed seeing more of them, with Susan, with Harriet, of course later on with Mel as well. Let's talk about Sutekh, kind of the big bad, the big boss, because last week I said I wasn't entirely sold on the whole CGI redesign. I think I kind of said I hope they kind of have some scenes where he does return to his original form that we saw in Pyramids of Mars. Again, just to give you something a bit more to latch on to have someone for Ncuti and the others to kind of perform against that's actually like a humanoid. I think on the whole, yeah, it looked okay in this episode. It looked a bit better than it did at the cliffhanger last week. It was nice to see more of the body of this new version of Sutekh as well, like with his limbs and stuff, rather than him just kind of being crowded around the TARDIS the whole time, although that was a great visual as well. I just can't help but feel they missed a bit of a trick with Sutekh by not bringing back that old design, because it's so familiar to Doctor Who fans and it's so iconic as well. It's such a brilliant piece of design, and yeah, I don't know how I feel about the fact that, this is all we got in terms of this massive sort of CGI creature. Maybe if they'd built up to that by having him appear as a humanoid first of all, and then grow and grow over the course of the story, that might have worked better. It was an interesting choice, to say the least. There were some nice visuals in there. The whole sequence at the end, regardless of how sort of silly it was with the whole whistle and the dog leash and all that kind of stuff, it was nice to see him kind of hanging off the intelligent rope or whatever it was in the time vortex, flailing about, his limbs flying all over the place, and then literally seeing him burst into flames right at the very end. That was really effective. Let's talk a bit more about the actual story and the way it unfolded. Because, like I say, the opening with the whole dust of death thing I thought was really, really nicely done. Very creepy, very atmospheric. But then you get the thing where everybody literally starts to turn to sand and to dust. Like Kate Stewart, Colonel Ibrahim, Morris, Rose, who for some reason is still there in the background. And Carla in the taxi, and Cherry and Mrs. Flood, back in the Sunday's flats. That was a funny one because, in the back of your mind, the moment you see that happen, you're thinking to yourself, well, yeah, clearly that is not going to be permanent. It's going to be reversed or rewritten at some point in the story. It's just a question of when that moment is going to come and what the explanation is going to be, for how things are reversed. And it felt like a bit of a waste of all those characters as well, all those characters that have been brought back for part 1, the whole new unit crew. To get rid of them immediately was okay. Of course, on the flip side, that allowed us to focus more on the Doctor and Ruby and Mel. It allowed Mel to kind of play more of a companion role than she has in the previous stories so far in this era. So it was nice to see her get a bit more to do. I mean, in some of the scenes, like in the Memory TARDIS, there wasn't loads for her to do. She was kind of like sitting there in the background, like listening to the Doctor and Ruby talk amongst themselves. The whole evil Sutekh possessed death mask Mel, as I've already mentioned, that was a really welcome addition to the story for me in terms of giving Bonnie Langford something more to do and to get her teeth into. The whole Memory TARDIS thing felt a bit weird as well because, originally we thought that set had been created especially for Tales of the TARDIS last year. It now transpires that wasn't the case. It was created for this story, the set was kept up, and they reused it for Tales, not the other way around. The idea of a remembered TARDIS is kind of neat, and it's nice to see all those, props and things in there, all these Easter eggs and things calling back to previous stories, previous eras of the show. It's just strange to wrap your head around the fact that this came first, not Tales of the TARDIS, and that set was, designed and conceived for this story, and I'm not sure how much I like the idea of that, really. Like, seeing that set on screen, beautiful though it is, and I'm sure a lot of work went into it, you can't kind of shake off the feeling that you are just like seeing these characters in the Doctor Who props cupboard or something. It's a bit too meta for my liking. It's a very small set as well, like quite cramped, and I'm not sure that works either. Having said all that, it did allow for some very, very nice moments like Mel stroking the Sixth Doctor's coat, and the Doctor and Ruby talking in there. Obviously you can now sort of fit in the Pyramids of Mars, Tales of the TARDIS, into a gap in this story when they're there for however many months or years. And it was a nice backdrop to those discussions, to those scenes, to all the stuff about how Sutekh had latched on to the TARDIS, the whole explanation there, the whole thing about Susan Triad cropping up everywhere the TARDIS lands, like 73 yards away or something. And conceptually, I did like that idea of the Doctor bringing death everywhere he goes, like Sutekh hijacking the TARDIS, hijacking the Doctor, and turning the Doctor's kind of force for good into a force for evil. The suggestion that Sutekh has been wrapped around the TARDIS literally since Pyramids of Mars for all these years, all these adventures, again, is a funny idea to get your head around. I mean, ultimately, it's not too deep. And it spawns some funny memes like, oh, imagine Sutekh being in this previous scene involving the TARDIS, like the Doctor and Yaz sitting on top of the TARDIS in the Power of the Doctor, or the end of the Day of the Doctor when there are 3 TARDISes there in the National Gallery. Does that mean there were also 3 Sutekhs? Or like in Flatline, does Sutekh shrink down with the TARDIS? In the Happiness Patrol, does Sutekh get spray painted pink? Etc, etc. Likewise, the kind of literal flashbacks to Pyramids of Mars on that television screen or whatever it was, that again felt a little bit strange. Like, sure, you can suggest that the Tales of the TARDIS thing takes place in this episode, but actually seeing the Doctor go back and watch clips from his old adventures midway through a new one feels a little bit weird. There are also some very random inclusions in this story, I felt. Things like the whole scene with the kind woman, with Sian Clifford's character, who, was great, and it was a nice enough scene, and it was great to see her in Doctor Who, but the whole thing felt a little bit inconsequential and a little bit random, and it's like, oh, okay, so we've paused the story, we're doing this now. The whole thing with the spoon as well just felt so random and strange. The callbacks to 73 yards were also a bit peculiar. Like, it's one thing to suggest that the TARDIS perception filter only lasts for like 73 yards or whatever it was. I think that's what they're trying to say there. But to bring back Roger Ap Gwilliam and to go to like Westminster and have the whole thing hinge around this random line from his interview, like an unseen clip about DNA testing, it's like, hang on a minute, what? I appreciated the idea of calling back to that story because, it was a great story, it was halfway through the season, it makes sense to kind of have something there that kind of comes back in the finale, and I wasn't expecting to see Roger again, so it was a genuine surprise. But I couldn't help but feel like, is this really the best you can do? Like, could you not have made more of this, perhaps having be a recurring villain throughout the series, or perhaps actually show us the Doctor's overthrow of him in 2046, rather than constantly alluding to something that happened off-screen? One thing I will say, and despite the way it was built up to with this weird DNA testing thing, the actual reveal of who Ruby's birth mother is, and the scene where they're reunited in the coffee shop, is absolute perfection. Loved that, the score as well in the background, it's just so emotional, so great. It was the sort of thing I was predicting by the end, like, oh, it will just be like an ordinary woman, it will reflect the whole emotional truth and reality of these situations in real life. And I definitely liked that in itself. I think in the broader context of the series arc and the whole mystery of Ruby's origins, yeah, that was a bit of a letdown, or maybe hyping it up in that way was a mistake, like with all this mysterious stuff with the snow, or with the Carol of the Bells, with the song that's trapped in Ruby's soul, or whatever it is that Maestro says. By all means, have this type of storyline in the show, but don't build it up to be something that it isn't. The final scene between the Doctor and Ruby, the kind of departure scene for Ruby, even though she is actually sticking around, was again very, very nicely done, exceptionally performed by Gatwa and Gibson, just perfection. I do agree somewhat that it felt a little bit unearned for the Doctor to be talking about Ruby in the way that he does, to be kind of hyping her up, given how few adventures they've actually had together, well, on screen at least. But it was so well performed and had such nice callbacks, like with Ruby wearing her outfit from her very first scene with Davina McCall, with the Doctor wearing his main outfit from the church on Ruby Road, that overall it did work for me. I think in short, in summary, for this episode of the finale overall, a bit of a mixed bag. There was some stuff I liked in there, some stuff I didn't like so much, some stuff that felt very random. It was a suitably epic story with some lovely visuals. It worked very, very nicely on the big screen, and I'll always remember the experience of seeing it there for the first time. Finales are always funny beasts because they never quite go where you expect them to go, and there is so much riding on them. But even so, at the moment, I'm not quite sure how I feel about this one. What did you think of Empire of Death? And like me, did you attend one of the cinema screenings? Be sure to let me know all of your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new for more stuff like this in the future. But otherwise, until the next one, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye for now.